The heir to Indiana Jones writing the cape tales of Batman with the financial support of one of the biggest movie studios in the business. A superhero unlike any other at the dawn of a new era of superhero movies. In a vacuum, a guaranteed success. In reality, a prototype abandoned after lack of user interest. Hi, I'm Dan Larson, and this is the history of The Rocketeer. Rocketeer is a 1991 live-action feature film adaptation of the comic book character created by Dave Stevens in 1982. Produced by Walt Disney Pictures, it arrived immediately after 1989's Batman and 1990's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, stalling at the box office before getting lapped by 1991's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Secret of the Ooze and 1992's Batman Returns. Cliff Secord is a hotshot pilot about to enter a national racing competition with a plane he and his friend Peavy spent the last 3 years building. On the maiden flight, Cliff accidentally crosses paths with a band of mafia thieves being pursued by federal agents. The criminals just stole a prototype rocket pack created by Howard Hughes that could revolutionize the battlefield and spell disaster for the American way of life if it fell into the wrong hands. A torrent of gunfire exchanged between the two parties rendered Secord's brand new racing plane collateral damage. Secord crashes, the mafia goons crash, the cops crash. Before the feds can take anyone into custody, the prototype rocket pack is hidden in the airplane hangar where Secord and Peavy work, inadvertently drafting them into a global struggle for power against the combined forces of the US government, local law enforcement, Hollywood, and the Nazis. With Peavy's help, Secord will use the prototype rocket pack to protect his friends from threats directly related to being in possession of the prototype rocket pack, like his girlfriend Jenny Blake, who Neville Sinclair attempts to manipulate into revealing its location. Because Sinclair has a dark secret, a dangerous partnership with an evil force that won't let anything stand in their way of total world domination. But they never prepared for someone to have the courage to push back, to strap on the experimental device to become the Rocketeer. The Rocketeer was created in 1982 by Dave Stevens. During the 1970s, he worked as a storyboard artist for Hanna-Barbera and as a freelance illustrator. He's the guy who did the art for Tommy's Mystery Men and Monster Maker in 1978. He later became a member of William Stout's studio. Stout was an artist and production designer who had been working in film and television since the 70s. Fate landed Stevens a tour of the set of Star Wars in 1976, where he was able to watch the filming of the Death Star trench run and met one of the visual effects artists, Joe Johnston. Stevens worked as a storyboard artist on 1981's Raiders of the Lost Ark, and in 1982 he wrote and illustrated the first Rocketeer story. 11 pages broken into 2 chapters that ran as filler in issue 2 and 3 of Mike Grell's Star Slayer, a science fiction fantasy series published by Pacific Comics. Stevens said he came up with the concept as a stream of consciousness indulgence, a comic that appealed to his love of old black and white adventure serials like Commander Cody, Sky Marshal of the Universe. While the appearance is brief, those 11 pages set the origin of the character, establishing a status quo for future adventures, and helped drive sales of Star Slayer as word spread about the exciting new character. A few months later, chapters 3 and 4 appeared in Pacific Comics issue 1 and 2. Chapter 5 would have to wait until November of 1984 as the Rocketeer found a new home at Eclipse Comics after Pacific went out of business. Issue 1 of the Rocketeer Special Edition finished off the story Stevens began in 1982. The entire adventure, all 5 action chapters, were collected in one place for the first time in 1985 as a graphic album published by Eclipse. Having worked in the movie industry, Stevens always envisioned the Rocketeer as a movie project. While Stevens didn't consider the Rocketeer to be an analog of Indiana Jones, it was clear that there was potential to tap into the same audience. Stevens sold the movie rights to Steve Miner in 1983, around the same time that another famous Rocketeer was falling into the Sarlacc pit on Tatooine. Miner had just served as the producer and director on Friday the 13th Part 2 and director of Part 3. Miner had also acquired the rights to Godzilla from Toho, for which William Stout produced storyboards and concept art. However, Miner couldn't secure the funding to make Godzilla, and Stevens wasn't happy with his vision for Rocketeer, so neither film was made. 2 years later, Stevens met with Danny Bilson and Paul DeMeo about the possibility of making a Rocketeer movie after they read his comics. In 1985, Bilson and DeMeo wrote and directed a movie called Zone Troopers about a US Army unit that teams up with space aliens to fight the Nazis in World War II. Stevens was far more encouraged by their ideas than he had had been with minors, so much so that he gave them an option on the property and an unlimited window to take as long as they needed to sell the idea to a studio, at which time they began to conceive of a film that leaned heavily into the 1930 adventure serial aesthetic, complete with low-budget production and shot in black and white. Until they got writer-director William Dear on board and realized that studios weren't even talking to anyone working with a budget less than $5 million. An easy change to make. It's always easier to add expenses to the budget. Heck, I could name at least 5 different ways to make this show more expensive right now. 1. Explosions. 2. Costumes. 3. Stunt doubles. T-shirt cannons. 5. Big name celebrities. In 1986, they started looking for a studio to make the film. At the time, comic book movies were limited to the waning Superman franchise and Lucasfilm's Howard the Duck. The Rocketeer didn't have the mainstream name recognition of Superman, and Howard the Duck was a spectacular bomb. The last studio they talked to was the only one that was interested. Walt Disney Studios saw the Rocketeer as a promotional vehicle for licensed merchandise, specifically toys, which is good in theory, but bad in practice if, like Stevens, you were trying to position the film for adults. The agreement Stevens and his team signed was for a potential trilogy. Initially, Disney was going to produce The Rocketeer under their Touchstone Pictures label, which meant that it was intended for an older audience and dealt with more mature subject matter. That quickly changed as a push for more toys and more kid-focused licensing shifted Rocketeer over to a standard Walt Disney Pictures film, and then the script revisions began. Dear, Bilson, and DeMeo attempted to accommodate Disney's changes for a film that could potentially see a wider release theatrically, but were repeatedly rebuffed in the interest of making it even more kid-friendly. The most significant changes were to Cliff's girlfriend, Betty. Originally designed by Stevens as a direct intentional homage to pinup star Betty Page, the law would have required them to either pay her for her likeness rights or adjust a few things. Betty was changed to Jenny, and instead of being a pinup model, she was now an aspiring actress. Ultimately, the origin of the rocket pack itself would change for the final film as well. In the comics, it is all but stated that Doc Savage, the 1930s pulp hero, was the person who invented the device. For legal reasons, that too had to be changed, with real-life eccentric rich person and aviation enthusiast Howard Hughes lending an air of realism. 5 years later, Disney officially put The Rocketeer into production. What changed? Was there something about the script that finally convinced Disney executives that it was ready? A character name? A costume? More Nazis to punch and throw out of Zeppelins? No, it was the entire landscape of comic book adaptations and movies in general. It was Batman. The success of Batman in June of 1989 absolutely flipped the table on the box office. Batman was an unrelenting pop culture phenomenon crossing every demographic, raking in dollars, moving merchandise, music videos, fashion, car accessories, soap dispensers, cereal. Batman was everywhere. Batman was everything. And then, less than a year later, in March of 1990, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles piled on for a superhero movie box office orgy of merchandising dollars raining down on Hollywood. Every studio executive worth their salt leapt into action to greenlight and fast-track whatever comics or comics-adjacent property they had in their libraries.
From Walt Disney Pictures, America's cheering for the summer's first family hit.
It's The Rocketeer.
And critics are raving. Not since Star Wars and Raiders of the Lost Ark has there been such an all-out fun movie like The Rocketeer. CBS calls it great fun and high-flying star-spangled entertainment. Gene Shalit says for kids and adults, The Rocketeer is a blast. And Siskel and Ebert give 2 thumbs up to the family adventure of the year. Disney's The Rocketeer, rated PG, now playing at a theater near you.
By 1990, Disney had delayed Rocketeer so many times that director William Dear had to move on to other things. Luckily for Disney, Joe Johnston was more than happy to offer his services to the project. Johnston got his start in movies working as a concept artist and effects technician on 1977 Star Wars. He's the guy who worked with Ralph McQuarrie to design Boba Fett's armor for 1980's The Empire Strikes Back. He worked on Raiders of the Lost Ark, Battlestar Galactica, Return of the Jedi, The Ewok Adventure, and Battle for Endor, Howard the Duck, and Batteries Not Included. He made his directorial debut in 1989 with Walt Disney's own Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, a movie that made over $200 million, 10 times its budget, launching the I Shrunk the franchise. Billy Campbell was cast as Cliff Secord, technically an unknown actor for the lead role, someone that Stevens and Johnston thought was perfect for the part but didn't excite the people paying to make the movie. They wanted a big name, at least as big as Michael Keaton was before Batman. Kevin Costner, Matthew Modine, Dennis Quaid, Kurt Russell, Bill Paxton, Emilio Estevez, Johnny Depp. Disney would have preferred any of them. They wanted a name to sell, but Johnston and Stevens ultimately got their pick. Jennifer Connelly, star of 1986's Labyrinth, was cast as Jenny. Alan Arkin was cast as Peavy. Eddie Valentine, a role intended for Joe Pesci, went to Paul Sorvino after Pesci said no. Timothy Dalton was cast as Neville Sinclair after Jeremy Irons also said no. Disney wanted to update the design of the Rocketeer's signature helmet. Disney wanted something that was more generically astronaut, something that would show off more of the actor's face, but neither Stevens nor Johnston were willing to go there. While the rocket pack itself was redesigned from the comics, the helmet was much more important, more iconic to the look and feel of the era, with Johnston threatening to leave if Disney changed the design. To him, without that helmet, it just isn't the Rocketeer. Multiple concepts were created by both Disney and Stevens. The final helmet was a testament to the strength of Stevens' original design from the comics, validating the fight to preserve it. Shooting began in September of 1990 and ended in January of 1991, longer than it was scheduled. Weather and technical issues added nearly 2 months and another $10 million to the budget as the scope and scale of the superhero adventure escalated. Part of that cost went to Industrial Light and Magic, the visual effects studio founded by George Lucas during the production of Star Wars in 1977, gobbling up production dollars like the Sarlacc pit that Boba Fett fell into. Disney spared no expense for the promotion and premiere of The Rocketeer. They did everything they could to replicate the market saturation approach of Batman and the Ninja Turtles. Promotional tie-ins with Pizza Hut and M&M's, a deluge of TV advertising, trading cards, comics, storybooks, lunchboxes, shirts, toys, games, Rocketeer gum. The Rocketeer opened June 21st, 1991, making just under $10 million, number 4 at the box office. Unfortunate timing for Disney that Kevin Costner's Robin Hood opened the same weekend, exactly the kind of reimagined superhero and cultural resonance that Disney was attempting to engineer. Robin Hood made about $400 million. The Rocketeer would ultimately bring in just under $50 million. Breaking even, breaking hearts. Disney attempted to juice the performance overseas, putting it back under the Touchstone banner, but to no avail. The movie ends with a perfect setup for a sequel as Jenny rescues the blueprints that Peavy reverse engineered from the prototype, suggesting that the next movie will have even more higher flying adventure, faster and more intense. We here in the future know that that never happened. Despite being a commercial disappointment, creator Dave Stevens was pleased with the adaptation. From a 2001 interview in Comic Book Artist magazine, quote, "I was so proud and the overall spirit and sweetness of the series is still there intact. We lost some good character stuff in editing for time, but the tone of it is still what I was trying to project in the comic pages." Disney had intended for the Rocketeer to drive sales of toys and other collectibles. Toy Biz, one of the most successful toy companies of the 90s, had the rights and even worked up concepts for Rocketeer figures. But the underwhelming performance at the box office brought a quick end to a full line of figures, leaving kids to play with a bendy figure released by Just Toys. It would be nearly 25 years before a proper action figure would be released by Funko and Super 7 as part of their reaction line. Today, fans have a bounty of options, from 2015's Funko Legacy figure with Nightmare Cliff Secord head, 2021's Diamond Select and Mego figures, and multiple versions of Metacom's 1/6 scale real action hero. And just this year, in 2022, Fresh Monkey Fiction announced new Rocketeer action figures coming in 2023. The Rocketeer was released on the Nintendo Entertainment System in 1991, a standard side-scrolling platform jumping adventure, not that different from Sunsoft's 1990 Batman game or Konami's 1990 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Nova Logic released a PC game that made its way to the Super Nintendo in 1992 with incredible graphics for the time but lacking gameplay value. The only awards it won were for being the worst. In 2019, Funko Games released a 2-player board game that taps into the character's world and Art Deco design of the Rocketeer, the same year that Disney Jr. launched the closest thing to a Rocketeer sequel since 1991. A single season of 22 episodes, each consisting of 2 11-minute stories aimed at younger viewers aged 2 to 5, it follows the adventures of Kit Secord, the 7-year-old great-granddaughter of Cliff Secord. If you managed to make it to the year 2022 without seeing The Rocketeer, good news! It was released on VHS and Laserdisc shortly after leaving theaters. It was released on DVD in 1999 and Blu-ray in 2011. It is available to buy or rent on a variety of streaming services, obviously Disney+. Despite the intention to make The Rocketeer into a franchise from the beginning, despite actors being contracted for multiple films, Disney's disappointment with the initial performance took that off the table. Over the years, it has endured, earning a larger audience and more fans around the world. Dave Stevens passed away in 2008, leaving the legacy of The Rocketeer to be carried on by other writers and artists. In 2011, IDW began publishing new Rocketeer comics, the most recent issues released this year in 2022 to celebrate the 40th anniversary of the comics. Talk of a proper sequel began in 2012. In 2016, writers Max Winkler and Matt Spicer were attached to a film being called The Rocketeers, a reboot/sequel set 6 years after the original. That was all wiped away by 2020 with an announcement that Aja Squire was writing with J.D. Dillard directing. In 2021, the name was changed to The Return of the Rocketeer, and Ed Reichort was writing a new screenplay. David Oyelowo and his wife Jessica were acting as producers. The story was centered on a former Tuskegee Airman that might also be played by David Oyelowo if he plays his cards right, but once again the project dragged on long enough that once again the director moved on to other projects. In November of 2022, Screen Rant reported that J.D. Dillard was officially stepping away from the project after claiming period aviation fatigue. His film Devotion, starring Jonathan Majors and Glenn Powell, released last week as of this video, was just a little too close for him to jump right back into such an aesthetically similar project. But if Brian Andrews, director of Marvel's What If, had his way, we would have already seen a dream team-up of Captain America, Agent Carter, and Cliff Secord. According to an interview in Variety, during the production of What If, Andrews pitched the possibility of Secord crossing over from the Disney Studios lot to the Marvel Studios lot. Conceptual art featured the three heroes taking out the Nazis together, which head of Marvel Studios Kevin Feige said, quote, yeah, no, we're not gonna do that. But I like the drawing. In a 2016 article on Forbes.com, Scott Mendelson suggested that The Rocketeer flopped because, quote, it was bred to be a popcorn winner without anyone stopping to ask if audiences would want to see it. He further suggests that Disney and other studio executives learned the wrong lessons from the success of Batman in 1989. Batman was a hero that, from their experience, was a, quote, 1930s, 1940s hard-boiled detective movie, so it's not that surprising that Hollywood reacted to its success by making a bunch of 1930s, 1940s pulp action movies that were at least somewhat supposed to remind audiences of the Dark Knight blockbuster. Batman and the Ninja Turtles kicked off an era of comic book movie adaptations that went in two opposite directions. Your grandparents' superheroes, characters like Dick Tracy, the Shadow, the Phantom, and their modern aesthetic descendant, the Rocketeer. Or obscure indie-flavored characters like The Mask, The Crow, Tank Girl, and Judge Dredd, while no one bothered to produce movies based on the most popular comic book characters at the time. You know, the things the 14-year-olds were actually reading and losing their minds over. Spider-Man, X-Men, The Punisher, Captain America, The Fantastic Four. I said what I said. That comics-inspired revolution, those successes showed up on television instead. Batman and X-Men animated series in 1992, Spider-Man in 1994, Iron Man, The Fantastic Four, Ghost Rider. That's where the future of comic book-inspired movies was being cultivated. Despite fantastic action, exciting adventure, and an aesthetic that delivered all the thrills of Indiana Jones at his best, it didn't connect with enough people who were kids in the 40s and 50s, or the kids who were living through the 90s. When the mission calls for Batman and the Ninja Turtles, you can't send the Rocketeer. Nothing fits right today. I feel weird. Did I look weird in this video? Yeah. Please hit like. Let me know if I looked weird in the video. Hit subscribe if you're not already a subscriber. Thank you very much to those of you who already are. If you're in the position to help the channel grow, if you'd like early access to the videos ad-free, please visit our Patreon at patreon.com/toygalaxy and let us know in the comments down below if you've seen The Rocketeer, when you saw it first. I thought I saw it in the theater for the first time, but I honestly can't remember for sure, and I don't mean that as a criticism of the film itself, but that's the reality of the situation, because I definitely remember when I saw Batman for the first time, Opera House Cinemas in Newport, Rhode Island, front row, against the wall, looking straight up because the screen was only like 6 feet from the chairs. It was one of the last 2 seats available. There was no way I wasn't going to see that movie as soon as possible. It was the event of my 13 years of life on this earth. Rocketeer was like VHS in '96. I thought I saw it in the theaters, but I might be thinking of Cutthroat Island. Cut.